The following content has been provided by RWTH Aachen University.
Provide feedback and be responsive. This means if you recall the 7 stages of action, we are supposed to provide continuous and complete feedback to bridge the gulfs of evaluation. Every user action requires some sort of feedback. If it's just a key press, then we just need a click or something like this. If it's a larger operation like deleting a file, we might want a confirmation dialog. You certainly don't want a text editor that after every letter that I enter goes like, you entered a Q. Yeah, okay. You entered an A. Okay. That would be annoying. GUIs are actually good at doing this kind of stuff. Why? Because the icons in a graphical user interface give you as a designer a way to visualize state on an object. The fact that an object is selected, you indicate that by inverting its colors, for example. And that's a great thing that you can't do easily in a text-based interface, like a command line. Also, of course, these icons allow direct manipulation, like dragging them and stuff like that. Nothing's more frustrating to the user than not knowing where they are or what they can do there. Remember, people always want to know, where am I, what can I do here, and how do I get back? Right? Those were the kinds of things that you want to have. Here's a dialog that is surprisingly wrong. This was the old Windows 2000 progress dialog for copying files. It's gotten better since, so they've learned. But this one, what are the things that are wrong with it? First of all, I know I'm copying. OK, that's what it says there. From where to where? Oh, from installer to installer. Well, thank you. That's very helpful, right? You don't know where that is. Also, it's suggesting to you that it's about this far done and 55 seconds remaining. Now, what's going to happen when this bar gets all the way to here? It's going to pause, right, for this like indeterminate amount of time. And I've seen progress bars that not only pause there and sit there at 99% forever, which is incredibly annoying, but then when they're done, they go back and they're like finishing copying, and they have another progress bar, which just drives me up the wall. If you ever do a progress bar, the only way that it makes sense is that if it progresses somewhat linearly, not pausing at the end, and if there's only one, right? Because I want to know, can I go get me a coffee? Can I go write a novel? Or like, can I take a vacation? How long is this going to take, right? So that's when it makes sense. But there are more things wrong with this, because is anybody here in the room believing this 55 seconds here? Not really, right? And the weird thing about it is the computer doesn't know exactly how long it's going to take, because there are things like network delays and whatnot, what's going on, or the hard disk is slower, da-da-da. But it's trying to suggest that it knows. And that's wrong, right? So these days, you'll find things here that say like about a minute. And that's all I need to know. I don't need to know 55 seconds. About a minute is more honest from the computer. It's more meaningful and completely enough for me. And it's also something that's not wrong as often, right? So the famous joke of the guy driving home who's a Windows user, and he calls his wife and says like, hey, honey, I'm going to be home in 5 minutes. No, wait, 3 hours. Oh, no, 4 seconds. Right? That's a typical situation with badly designed dialog boxes. And software engineering-wise, it's difficult. It's difficult to precisely estimate the time a task is going to take, because there are variables in there that you may not always be able to control fully. But that's where you can put your smarts as a programmer and really make these things as good as possible. And while you're estimating and you don't know yet, well, tell the user that you're estimating, right? A lot of dialogs these days do that. There's one more thing that's wrong with this, by the way, because if you had these letters flying from A to B, and you pulled the network cable, right? So copying to a network was definitely not happening anymore. The letters would still keep flying. Right? These pages would still fly over there. And there would always be a new one in here. It would always disappear in this one. This one would always be empty again. So there was something weird going on. My mental image is that Bill Gates found some sort of like, nerdy intern who came to them and said, make a little animation up there. It doesn't need to mean anything. Just entertain people while they're waiting for this. If you make these things, then make them meaningful. Right? If you have this kind of visualization of progress, make it meaningful. Sometimes I see printer icons down on the desktop that will actually show you little pages still stacked in the printer as they're being printed. That's great. Hopefully they're actually realistic and they show you the actual progress, right? But don't do these things just, if they don't mean anything but they look like they do. Because this dialog could actually close at this very moment. When it's 100% done, the last page could be still up here in the air. And I can see my mom going like, oh my God, the last page didn't get copied. Like, is it below the computer or where did it go, right? Also, these pages were not relating to documents or pages in one document. They were completely meaningless. So make these things meaningful if you do design these kinds of animations. Make them rich. Make them tell the user something that they can rely on. All right. I want to show you something. Somebody wrote a book a couple months ago called Micro Interactions, I think. It's a fantastic book. It shows you how deep the art and science of interface design goes to really get things right. And I will show you, I think, a short example here that I put this in before this book appeared, but I think it's sort of speaking to the same principles. The question here is, let's say you're using your favorite operating system. No peeking now. Don't use your computer to try this. Let's say you select a menu item from the menu bar, right? You drop down a menu and you pick an item with your mouse, with your trackpad, whatever. What exactly happens in the moment when you complete your selection of that menu item? I'm not talking about the effect that printing starts or something. I'm talking about the visual effects.
It blinks.
It blinks. Yeah, that's pretty close. Let's look at what actually happens precisely. So here's this is Windows 7, but close enough. What Windows 7 does when you select a menu, look closely. You may have seen that. If not, I'll show you the individual phases here. What happened was when you selected this and you let go of the mouse cursor, the menu disappeared, but the entry that you had clicked on disappears a little later. This is really millisecond or tenths of a second interface design, but it's super meaningful because it gives you a very subtle but unmistakable cue that you picked this option, not the one above or below. I'll show you another one. What does Mac OS X do? You want to see this again? Yeah, sure. Let me go back. Here's the video. Yeah, you see that? OK. So here's another one. Here's Mac OS X. OK. I'm going to play this again as well. So that's the blinking you were referring to, right? So what's happening here is you select, then it gets unselected once, it gets selected again, and then everything fades away at the same rate. The classic Mac OS 9 actually allowed you to change the number of blinks you got on your menu item from 0 to 3 in a little dialog in a control panel. And yeah, kind of nerdy, but what was really interesting about it is if you turn it to 0, you felt like you were walking on ice. Because you would select a menu, and it would just go away. You wouldn't know what you picked. And that's very, very strange. It feels like, did I actually choose the right one here? Because you're missing that final feedback. If you do this, by the way, on KDE, it doesn't do anything. We tried this out. It depends on the version and some of the settings, but there is a version that will not do anything, and it will feel like walking on ice. Here's a GNOME example. If you run this from the CD, like the CD-based distros, it will actually just disappear. So let me show you what this does. That's what it does. And so there is no in-between thing, right? In one moment you think you've selected this one, but you may have slid up there in the last moment and you can't see it, right? It goes away. If you actually install the Ubuntu installation, for some reason, then it does it. No, don't ask me why. Then it has something where the whole menu slowly fades out. But there's no particular highlighting of that one item. And these are really super small interaction design questions that you need to think about. Similarly, like when you drop down and you go to a sub-menu that you want to pick, how long does it take to pick that sub-menu? When does the sub-menu go away? When does the entire menu close? These are really micro-interactions that need to be designed. When I talk about feedback, I'm not just talking about visual feedback. I'm also talking about auditory and haptic feedback. So, for example, that is one of the reasons why smartphones and tablets suck, because they don't have physical buttons. And for a lot of tasks, especially when you want to be eyes-free, if you've ever tried typing a text message, not looking at your smartphone screen, you know what I'm talking about. It's basically impossible to hit the right keys because you don't know where they are, you can't feel them. Whereas with a real physical keyboard, I can type without looking. Right? So don't underestimate the power of these weird appendages that we all have, of feeling things, of touching, of understanding an interface before we actually work with it. Haptic feedback also means that once I do something, I get physical feedback, a click, a visible bounce back from a key. That is very powerful. We built a whole system called FingerFluxo a couple of years ago that actually gave you physical feedback in your finger by attaching a magnet to your finger, just glued on, nothing surgical here, and providing you electromagnetic feedback over a surface. So you could actually feel a 3D landscape, so to say, of electromagnetic rejection and attraction forces.
This content was provided by RWTH Aachen University.